Keeping up with security issues across thousands of web assets without the right approach to web application security is a daunting task. Get ahead with web vulnerability scanning automation from NetSparker, a leader in dynamic and interactive application security testing known for its ease of use and accurate results. Detect a wide range of vulnerabilities in all legacy and modern web applications, address security bugs at scale by automating the confirmation process, automatically prioritize vulnerabilities, and assign actionable tickets to the right developers in their native workflows for rapid remediation. For more information on how to scale application security with ease, visit securityweekly.com/NetSparker. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. If you want to stay in the loop, all things Security Weekly, please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe. You can subscribe to your favorite podcast via your favorite podcast catcher, or subscribe to our YouTube channel, sign up for our mailing list, join our Discord server, and follow us on our live streaming platform, Twitch. So we broadcast live on Twitch and YouTube, and today was kind of the first in what I think will be several different kind of just live broadcasts, right? Like, yeah, we do podcasts, we do webcasts, and what I've been conveying to the team is, like, look, can we just like live stream something like that we think is cool, and if our listeners think it's cool, we'll do more of it. And today, Dr. Doug White and I built a computer from scratch, from start to finish, in like a 3.5 hour live stream extravaganza. It was hilarious. There were some innuendos. There wasn't any blood. Usually when I build a computer, like, I end up cutting myself.
Or electrocution.
Or electrocuting Spark. There was none of that, but it was lively. It was entertaining. The amazing part was, and largely, I think just because Doug and I, we had each other. Like, normally, like, Doug will come in, like, while I'm building a computer and be like, I'll ask Doug a question, whatever, or Doug will do his build and he'll ask me a question. But Doug and I had never, like, we've been building computers independently for 20 years. We've never done one together. So we do one together. Like, you can watch the recording, I'm not lying. We turn it on after the build, and it booted right up into the BIOS, and we installed Windows Live right on the server, like, first shot. And I'm like, we're like, this doesn't usually happen, just so you know. Like, it's usually like 3 or 4 things that we forgot or had to switch around or whatever before it was booting. But we got, I mean, that's really just luck. I mean, it was really.
You figured out how to do slick editing to figure it out.
No, man, it was not. Believe me, I'm still in shock from it. So yeah, check out our live stream. We're going to be doing more stuff like that. We're going to do some Stogie Geek stuff. So some Security Weekly folks we're gonna do a Stogie Geeks thing, sit around and smoke cigars, and hopefully do more of our live streams. So it's awesome.
That'll be fun.
I am really blessed this evening. Patrick Laverty, John Kinsella, Joff Thayer have all joined us for the news segment. Joff, you've got an announcement. You're teaching a class next week.
I am. I'm doing another run of enterprise attacker emulation and C2 implant development next week. It is Wild West Hackin' Fest week. Unfortunately, we had to cancel the live event, and so we are doing it completely virtually. But I am teaching on Tuesday and Wednesday next week, which would be, I'm just trying to think, September 21 and 22, I think. And it's not too late to sign up. So if you're interested, check it out. You can just go to bit.ly/Joff's C2 class, or you can go to the Wild West Hackin' Fest site and look it up from there. In a short, as I can state it, basically we talk about C2 implant development and a lot of shellcode execution mechanisms that go anywhere from C#, Golang, Python. We cover a lot of languages, a lot of techniques.
Do you cover Ruby and Perl?
And no. Hell no. But no, we have a lot of fun with it, and if you're interested, just check it out. I would love to see you there. I got a lot of good reviews from the class, and
What about STL?
STL.
So that was the programming language on the PLCs that was used in Stuxnet, and it's I want to give a shout out to the Brown University Masters in Cybersecurity program. I spoke there this week on hacker history and hacker culture, and I use that as an example of how hackers will, like, if we don't know a technology or understand it, like, we want to go get up to speed on it and learn it as fast as we can. And one of my examples is how some of the Stuxnet researchers that had discovered the virus had to learn STL to figure out how the PLCs were being manipulated. And that's one of my examples where, like, this is a thing that hackers do. And I think one of the most prolific examples, that we have of that. So, a lot of great questions, a lot of history and culture in the hacking scene that I have in that presentation. It was a shortened version. Also, I didn't realize that I talk about the movie Hackers in that presentation, and when I gave it on September 15th, it was in fact the 26th anniversary of the movie Hackers. It was released on September 15th, 1995, which is pretty amazing. So go watch the movie Hackers and pay homage to that movie, because I think it's my favorite hacker movie. So,
hey, and while we're talking about upcoming events,
you're doing Layer 8?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's coming up in just a couple of weeks on October 8th. It's a Friday, and it's going to be a virtual event. So wherever you are, you can attend from anywhere in the world or even from the International Space Station. That's one that I've always been trying to get somebody to attend from, because I think that would be completely awesome to get somebody from there. But yeah, anywhere.
You want someone from space?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I want somebody from the space station.
Wait, Patrick, don't you actually want somebody from one of the civilians on SpaceX Dragon right now? That wouldn't it?
That would be awesome too. I think they're only up there for a few days. So
yeah, we got like 2 more days, I think.
Yeah, Layer 8's on Friday, October 8th. Super affordable. Tickets are just $25. It's all virtual, and it's a full day of social engineering and open source intelligence, or OSINT, topics. So hopefully people that are interested in either of those kinds of topics will join us for that.
What's the website?
That is layer8conference.com.
Fantastic. We got a lot of... do we have another announcement? We did. Security Week. Speaking of conferences, Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person December 5th through the 7th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista. We're excited to announce some of our speakers: Leslie Carhart, John Strand, Alyssa Miller, Patrick Coble, Chris Eng, Michael Schlatt, Kevin Johnson, Jay Beal, and so many more. Visit securityweekly.com/unlocked and register today. Check out the Rockstar lineup.
You know what? I should come down and visit for that. I mean,
I'm really hoping, I'll be frank, I'm really hoping it's an in-person event, right? Like, in-person event stuff has struggled. I was reading Heidi's update for ShmooCon, and I was kind of like, if ShmooCon happens in person, I really want to go, because I really want to go back to in-person conferences. So, that usually ShmooCon is in, January, February.
Yeah.
I'm hoping, things start opening up.
Gurkon's doing it right now.
No, sweet.
Gurkon is in person up in Michigan.
That's where Jeff is. Yeah, I believe that's where Jeff is. So.
Oh, wow. You know what?
My first.
Yeah. We need things to, settle out with this whole, endemic, pandemic, whatever we're calling it. But, come on now. It's time for this virus to go away.
Yeah, knock it off.
What were you saying, John?
I was at my first in-person conference this week. CSA had September up here in Seattle and Bellevue. And for most of us in the rooms, it's the first time we were in the same room with somebody else since RSA.
Yeah.
It was sort of creepy, but at the same time, it was pretty wonderful to actually go and see your friends and buddies. So I can't wait for this to sort of loosen up a little more, whatever way it happens.
Yeah, agreed.
So I'll throw if you don't mind, Paul, extra comment on that. We did Wild West Hack and Fest Reno this year in the sort of dip, right, before Delta started emerging.
Yeah,
and it was so weird. People didn't know how to interact with each other anymore. I mean, COVID really impacted interpersonal skills. I mean, it was bizarre.
Come on, anyway. with our crowd, did they know how to interact in the first place?
Yeah, it's always been a challenge. I mean,
give people a lot of credit.
We spend a lot of time behind the keyboard, by ourselves essentially. So hopefully we can get back to it. Where do we want to start? I think that the NSO group and Citizen Lab and how it intersects with the zero-click iOS exploit, which also had a PDF exploit, which I'm not sure if those were the two that were chained. Let me try and give a quick synopsis. I want to give credit to Jack Resider at the Darknet Diaries, which is just one of my favorite podcasts in the world. He's knocking it out of the park.
The last 2 episodes have been awesome.
Oh my God, he just does such a great job. He was on the show a few weeks ago. So Jack did some stuff on this, coupled with stuff I've read. Like basically, NSO Group, we know, is the Israeli company that has the Pegasus software, which relies on exploits that allows people, air quotes people, to spy on other people through basically exploiting their phone, as I've observed. It could be other methods, but they're kind of cagey about what they do, how they do it, and who they do it with. Is Patrick's smiling because you listened to the episode, right? I mean, that's really kind of the crux of the
right.
The episode is those 3 kind of factors in this. So Pegasus has been around for a while. But how you get Pegasus on the phone is some of the controversy. Originally, it was the user had to click on a link in a text message. Then they developed an exploit that didn't require that the user click on that particular exploit. They didn't want to necessarily admit what they had, or certainly who they shared it with, which kind of segues into another story we have about former spies being prosecuted, essentially. We'll get to that. Citizen Lab has 2 reports. One is Democracy Now! The NSO Group's spies secretly seized control of Apple devices by exploiting a flaw in code. Also, the other article they have is the iMessage zero-click exploit was captured in the wild. So I think like the only way we could kind of prove that NSO Group was using this air quote zero-click exploit was to actually capture it, and they did. They reported it to Apple on September 7th, and Apple on September 13th confirmed it and released an update. Now, say what you will about Apple, and we're going to say some things about Apple and how they treat security and security researchers, which isn't all that positive, to be quite honest. But now look at the timeline here. The 7th to the 13th, not a whole lot of time, and they did fix it. Primarily because this is such a hot button issue. Sorry.
Well, I think they wanted to fix that too because they had a announcement coming out on what was that, Tuesday this week? It was one of the broadcasts, so I suspect they wanted to not have that sort of.
They didn't want the heat
in the background.
Yeah. That's certainly a theory. So there's a CVE that has to do with WebKit and one that has to do with PDF processing. None of this, to folks like us and many of us listening, right, that have been in security for some time, is really any shock. It's really, it's funny. We talk about static code analysis. It's really about what functions in functionality inside your software takes user input and or unstructured data and tries to process it is usually where the vulnerabilities lie. Although I think the WebKit one was in assignment, use after free vulnerability, I think was the WebKit one. And the PDF was, obviously data parsing was at fault there, but.
Yeah, I mean, it's not surprising that some of these things are coming to the surface. It just takes people to actually look at them. We've said this over and over and over on the show. It's wherever people's, are focused in terms of what code they're looking at as to see whether things are exploitable. And in the case of Apple iOS, it's been less attention for a lot of folks. But certainly these agencies that have an interest in following it, they're going to find it, right? I mean, it's just a matter of time. Image rendering is a particularly vicious kind of area when you think about it.
Because it's data that you have to parse. Yeah. When you look at an image on the screen, you got to understand, the computer's just parsing that ones and zeros to display that image.
Yeah. Well, it's particularly vulnerable to attack, right? Because it's a sizable attack surface, right? You're sending data for display. So yeah, it's
the thing is also.
Go ahead, John.
It's always it's one of these areas where we're always seeing new technology, right? The latest things now is Dolby, whatever. What's the chance that codec is 100% clean and doesn't have some ability to be some sort of malicious data put in there too, right? So as we want to well, we're getting some benefit out of better quality, better resolution, all those things. But also, as a company like Apple wants to market more and more and come out with a new sort of cool technology under a millimeter thinner, and I'm a big Apple fan, but that new tech for those bells and whistles is sort of giving a chance for this type of stuff to come in.
And how it's used was really interesting to me. When I Jack did a great job of chronicling as best he could. Like, he couldn't get NSO Group to come on the show. I mean, and he talked about that when he was on our show. Like, I mean, he put like just an enormous effort into trying to get NSO on the show. And what he had to rely on was all the reports from Citizen Lab, all the reports from other major news outlets that interviewed them. And what you glean from that are stories on how it could have been used. So, like, if you've got a weaponized exploit for iOS and you sell it to someone, a nation state or a government, they can use that for bad or good. In a lot of cases, it sounded like both. Like, the Mexican government, for example, wanted to use that to go after drug cartels. But politics come in the mix. And what if we were to put it on the journalist's phone, but maybe not just the journalist's phone? What about the journalist's family? Because maybe the journalist isn't going to fall for the SMS phishing attack, but their family is. And they found it on, friends and family of targets that it's really questionable whether they're criminals. In fact, in some cases, you can be like, that person's not a criminal. Like, you're going after it for political means. And there's all these stories about all these different governments that could get a hold of this technology. Sure, use it to go after criminals, but if you can use it to go after criminals, you can use it to go after people who oppose the government in these countries. That was the really kind of, I think, aspect of this type of attack that was really interesting and somewhat scary, right?
And I think in the Mexican situation, I think Jack on Darknet Diaries talked about that's how they went after the drug cartel, was not by going after, he mentioned El Chapo himself, that they actually...
Because El Chapo doesn't have a phone. Like,
exactly.
He's smart enough to be like, I'm not having a phone. Like, you can track me with...
Right.
Some people think the vaccine tracks you. Well, even El Chapo knows, like, no, if I've got a phone, you're going to track me.
Right. So on Darknet Diaries, they talk about how they put Pegasus on the phones of people around El Chapo, including a minor, which I can't remember whether it was his son or a cousin or something like that. And I think another family member and an attorney or something like that. And allegedly... that's how they were able to find where he was. And of course, everybody denies that any of that happened, but...
Sure. Well, you want to go after the mob, you go after the bookkeeper.
Right.
Right? I mean, that's...
and it's the same thing with the Saudis in Khashoggi, that allegedly that's how he was tracked down. And as Jack kind of points out in there, like, it was kind of a waste because they were tracking him with the software, but at the same time, he was going to be going into the embassy in Turkey anyway, so they already knew that he was coming. So, but this is also one of the things that really interests me about the software as well, and how widely that it's going to get used, because the more that you use it, then the more that you're risking it being found. And certainly,
that's a great point.
When this thing was patched this week, like I was texting with a buddy who's a CSO at a university, and I was telling him, like, that's at least a $3 million 0 day that just got burned. That doesn't work anymore, that people paid millions of dollars for. But I'm sure NSO has replacements anyway, although I'm going to guess that NSO is not replacing that for free.
No, certainly not. But also, when you look at a nation state, like $3 million is
drop
like
in
a
the bucket.
drop in the bucket for the benefit that they get, even if they had to spend another $3 million to get the next one from NSO.
Right.
It's...
They have all of them.
I was explaining this to the students, right, like at Brown, that to develop physical weapons is billions of dollars, right? So to go to these groups and spend, a few $1 million to get some of this capability is totally within. Well, why wouldn't you do that?
Imagine going to the NSA and saying, this is going to be $3 million for this spyware. NSA would laugh and be like, all right, how many can we buy?
Where do we send the check?
Right. Do you just want cash?
Right.
3.
But I mean, it turns out though that is punishable by law. This is a really interesting thing. We talked about this with Patrick Worrell, right? Like, and I asked Patrick, I'm like, so you worked for NSA, because you said that. I don't want you to get in trouble for what you say, but like you work for NSA, and I know some of your buddies at NSA. You don't have to comment on this, but like I know they did stuff for NSA where they developed exploits, then they left, and then they developed exploits and then sold them. And I'm like, secrets or whatever. Like I'm not whatever. But let's talk about the premise of you've developed an exploit. They could be used as a weapon. You sell it to someone. What are the ethical ramifications? Now, what I didn't ask was, what are the legal ramifications of that? And here we have 3 former U.S. They call them spies, right? They worked for some government agency. And again, I haven't read like every single detail on this, but they sold it to the United Arab Emirates. Did I say that right?
Emirates.
Yep. UAE. And they were charged with international traffic in arms regulations. They conspired to commit access to device fraud and computer hacking offenses, which is interesting. I wonder if they were prosecuted under could they be prosecuted under the CFAA? I would think it'd be people that used the tools that did that, but they were basically they are being prosecuted in arms trafficking. I don't believe
makes more sense,
right? And I don't believe they'll serve from what I've read from the filings, they won't serve jail time. They agreed to pay fines, resulting in like $1.3 million. All 3 of them have to pay like various amounts. The largest being $750,000, which I always kind of wondered when you have to pay fines from that. Like, what if you don't have $750,000 laying around? Like, what? There's a process for that, and
there's a monthly payment plan.
There's some kind of process for that, right? But these folks were processed. So, like, it turns out if you do just sell exploits willy-nilly to anyone, there's consequences to that. Is that just this case, or is that
taxes?
Right? Is that an expense? Can I write that off?
It's tax deductible. Hey, legitimately, if you're in our industry, that's got to be a tax deductible expense. I would
had to pay a fine because I was convicted of international arms dealing.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking on the other side, like if you sell one, do you have to pay income tax on it? Because I can see the IRS coming after these 3 guys next. They want their $2.
Yes. If you're the law, as I understand it, is if you're a U.S.-based company and you receive income via your U.S.-based company, you have to pay income taxes on that.
Yeah, that's
if I were to do it, if I were to sell exploits,
in theory,
I'd have a company outside the U.S. that would take that payment. Therefore, I don't have to pay U.S. federal taxes or state taxes on that because it's outside. However, if I want to bring that money into my U.S. bank account, then I have to claim it as income. But I can spend it internationally on my new yacht or private island or whatever it is.
Pleasure craft of choice.
Yes.
But legitimately, if you're going to earn the income, then you ought to have the tax deduction because, right? I mean, you got to be able to offset.
Those go together. Yeah.
The earnings. These things are paired up. Yeah, good luck getting that by the IRS. But
I just think it's interesting that we've often debated the ethical aspect of it, but not so much the international or the laws in the U.S. And this is a case where they were convicted. Basically,
it's a very. I'm not a lawyer, but I play one on TV. It's a very different thing to be prosecuted under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act versus being prosecuted under the guise of exporting munitions. That's a different entity.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
I understand.
Very different. Yeah.
And this seems like it's exporting munitions, which is where, if you remember back Clipper chip days, that was crypto as well, right?
Yeah.
It was considered a munition, and so I can see a legitimate case there, frankly, on the government's behalf, right? I mean, it's a munition, it's a weapon. I'm not in that business. So.
It's a pretty small number of countries, though. Is UAE on there? I didn't think they were.
I'm not sure.
Like
It's a good question.
Iran,
right?
It's North Korea.
Yep.
It's probably Syria. It was like turning into a pop quiz. How many can I name?
Right.
Yeah, but is it a fixed list at any one time? Let's just be honest.
It's a list that
it
might
is.
change. Well, it's a list that might change. How often, I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
There was another, kind of opinion piece that was run by Esquire, which I think is really interesting because one of the most popular and prolific articles about early hackers was an article that was run by Esquire on phone phreaking back in the day and quoted Captain Crunch. I actually read it and linked to it in my presentation on hacker history. So Esquire ran this kind of opinion piece that, there's been a years-long investigation and policymakers have been trying to update the laws and regulations regarding how much of their expertise of former American intelligence operatives can be peddled to foreign countries. And how does this intersect with those that are security researchers? You're working for the government developing exploits. Now you're not working for the government and you're using that same expertise and knowledge to now sell those exploits to foreign countries. And the author kind of makes a claim that this cannot be a space that is beyond the law. And we've seen this in action now, and I think it's really an interesting kind of thing. We kind of painted it before as, I develop an exploit, I sell it to someone, I don't know how they're going to use it, but no harm, no foul on me. I get my payment and I'm good. That's not the case now, which is interesting.
Well, and the rabbit hole gets a lot deeper, of course, because if you sell your export to the U.S. government, there's no guarantee they're not going to sell that to somebody else.
Right. But you might not get prosecuted and go to jail if you sell it to the U.S. government. You're good. Which is kind of a weird ethical dilemma as well.
It's a weird ethical dilemma, yeah. Exactly. Right? That's potentially...
How do I know what the U.S. government... How do I know what anyone's going to do with my exploit that I've developed?
Well, they may not be the highest bidder, but they might be the safest bidder.
Safest one, right?
And that also falls into another of the Darknet Diaries episodes. I was listening to this one today, the Shadow Brokers episode. What if you do create an exploit, sell it to the U.S. government, and then sometime later you see it getting dumped to the internet by shadow brokers?
But that would Eternal Blue never happen.
No. I wrote that.
What?
I sold that to the U.S. government, and then here are these other non-probable U.S. government people.
I've always found that fascinating because we likely know probably within a degree or maybe not even two, we probably know the person that wrote that, right?
Right.
We know there are people who are like, yeah, I wrote that.
Yep.
And it was leaked and it was used by Russia.
Yep. And that can't be a good feeling.
Russia is Russia on the list, John, of places we can't sell exploits to?
You'd think it is, but I don't think so. And I see this usually when I'm doing contract work, right? So you'll see the ITAR caption in there.
Right.
I don't think Russia's on that list. Now I got to look.
Really interesting.
He's gonna go look.
He's gonna go look. Really interesting stuff.
It's actually
go do the jazz hands.
Relatively long list.
Jazz hands. That's awesome.
But I don't see Russia on the list.
So it's cool. I mean, you can develop an exploit, sell it to Russia.
Yeah.
You cannot sell
to
you cannot sell to Liberia, but you can to Russia.
Yeah, of all things, right? I mean, we need the proverbial fast typing, memes at this point. It's important.
Hacker diaper.
Hacking happens in 30 seconds in Hollywood, baby.
Well, and you can have two people beating on the same keyboard, and that works.
Yeah, apparently.
That's what pair coding is, right?
That's pair development. Yeah?
That's right. That's actually is it still a thing? How do you do that when you work from home? Did you get on a Zoom call with a?
Yeah. So what?
Do they still do that?
There's a CTO Slack I hang out on, and we've been talking about the best way to interview people. And one of the things that people have been saying is, I like doing homework assignments, get people to take home.
Yep.
Some people have to have them come into the office and do pair coding. But now modern days is they are, they're doing it over Zoom. So you can share either an IDE or a GDoc or something. So it's still going on. It's not quite Pivotal is pretty much the only one who does that really purely that I know of, but some of it.
Like, I remember having to write source code on a whiteboard to get my first programming job in college. But certainly programming...
And that's exactly what I want to get away from, right? Because there's the thing right now is we have people probably listening to this that, like, they study for interviews, not study for their job. That's really bad.
Right. There is a paradigm where studies have shown, right, that if you put two people, like 3 is too many, 1's not enough, but 2's the magic number, and you have 2 people programming at once. I mean, we kind of proved that with the computer build today. Like, 2 people is a good number to be able to work together to solve a complex problem. Yeah, that's definitely a thing.
Past the interview.
I want to segue back into Apple had the zero-click exploit. We talked about NSO group and ARMS kind of stuff and international export laws. But then coming back to how Apple treats security researchers, and this was something that Patrick Wardle talked about a couple of weeks ago on the show. I asked Patrick flat out, I'm like, how do you feel about how Apple treats researchers? And he's like, yeah, it's not great, dude. Like, it's not. Like, it's not a secret that security researchers have been and are today frustrated with the way Apple treats security vulnerabilities. I have to say, as a security professional and someone that does podcasts and talks about this stuff every week, I am also frustrated over the years and still today how Apple approaches and handles security-related matters. And don't get me wrong, a lot of our friends, people that we know, people we've had on the show, work for Apple, and I applaud their efforts, and I guarantee you those folks that I know personally are pushing Apple to treat security researchers the way they want to be treated. Someone did a study. Was it TechCrunch? Someone did a study. Washington Post conducted a study. We've kind of pseudo conducted our own study in talking to Patrick, right? About like how do security researchers feel about reporting stuff to Apple? And security researchers say, and I quote, Apple limits feedback on which bugs will receive a bounty, and former and current Apple employees say there's a massive backlog of bugs that will be addressed. Also, they say in interviews with more than 24 security researchers, Washington Post collected a number of complaints that Apple is slow to fix bugs and doesn't always pay out what's owed. Yet, and again, here is my frustration with Apple. Apple's response from one of their folks who was given permission to speak on this, right, says that Apple feels the program has been a success. Like, really? Like, so you just had like so many security researchers like saying like, Apple, you've got some like fix this stuff. Patrick gave lots of examples on the show when he came on. Many other researchers have examples. They've expressed their concerns, and Apple's like, but no, the program's a success. Like, okay, how do you define success?
I gotta ask, is this a hangover from that closed source mentality? I mean, it feels that way.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
So it's like, we are. It's almost like as pen testers, how often do we go in and test somebody's, application product, and you encounter this developer crystalline entity mentality where our crystalline entity is absolutely perfect. How dare you kick in the door, right? That's what it kind of feels like to me. I don't know, just me.
Well, no, I mean, you see the same thing with both pen tests and also code reviews, where the company wouldn't want to give you their code. And like, even once I get it, when I'm in the building, it would take me like a week just to figure out how to get the damn thing to compile. But they're like, oh, don't take our source code. And it's like, what do you think I'm going to do with it? And right. I think there's probably some of that going on here. They're known for being controlling about, controlling that public image. But it's a little bit too much of a clique of invite-onliness.
Is that what you buy? Is that part of what Apple's selling, is that image? And security researchers, in their view, are tarnishing that image? I'm asking you, John, because you said you're an Apple person, right?
That's a really great point. I mean, Yeah, probably part of the reason that I've got I refer to them, this is my God device. Part of the reason I've got my God device is like, yeah, it's fairly secure compared to an Android box, right? You can go and harden an Android machine or go OnePlus or pick your poison, but that is probably part of the reason I go with them. Am I worried about the image being tarnished? Me personally, hell no, right? I want that stuff to be found and fixed.
Yeah.
And so, but then again, I believe in full disclosure for decades and open source and all these type of things. So that's probably where part of the this type of thing goes on.
I was going to say, isn't there an inherent conflict there? Because this is a closed community, closed source, and okay, so you think it's not tarnished, you think it's not vulnerable, but do you really know? That's where it's at.
Yeah. I think we've got a story up here later from Member about some of the cloud issues we've seen from our buddies over in Redmond. And this is part of, even though they're not trying to be closed, think about, we talked about this on ASW. If you're a cloud provider providing a service, I don't know how you're providing that service, what software is behind it. So this comes back to this whole SBOM concept of how do we provide enough information so our consumers can trust what we're doing?
That's a great question,
It's a tricky
but because it's different from, I think the core dump we all had in our brains, John, when you asked that question it's very different from Apple versus my cloud provider. Like, as a consumer, I think that's a different scenario than my cloud provider. And with the Azure story, it's when I deploy Linux in Azure, then when I enable this list of like 8 or 10 services, I get new code and software deployed to my device that just happens to be like 1990s vulnerable, essentially. And
yeah. And
where's my visibility into that to make a risk-based decision?
Yeah.
And I think it's a bit of a stretch between the 2 points. I'll give you that. But I think if you think about, especially that concept you're saying of if Apple's not responding to some of these things quick enough, or any provider is, and I, as I've got my devices and I think everything's nice and shiny and happy, that's false sense of trust. So
it's not just the timing of the response with Apple that bugs me, John. It's we fixed this and we were never going to tell you about it. It's like, there's new protections in the operating system against this malware, but no one's ever seen that malware before. And Apple just put Patrick Worrell talked about this, and this is one of the things I took away from the interview that bothered me the most about Apple was, so you're saying someone told you that there was malware or some kind of technique, you put a protection in macOS, but you never really told anyone. There was no, like, if you had come to the community, to the public, and said, hey, we just got wind of this. Like, even after you pushed out the fix, push out the fix, push out the protection, then, like Google does, make a really nice blog post that says, this is what we observed, right? This is what we observed. And you can't update your stuff right away. By the way, this is what we observed. You don't have to say where it came from, but we observed this.
You know
here's
what
how
it
we
is.
reverse engineered it. Here's how we put the fix in. Be transparent in the process. Apple doesn't do that, and I think that's the thing that gets me. It's not about their response time. It's about their transparency.
I can think of two words that
controlling the
apply.
message.
I think there's two words that apply. It's a level of condescendence and arrogance. And
nah, I don't think so. Well, go ahead.
Well.
no, I do.
I agree with you, Jeff, but I think that's a different thing.
yeah.
I mean, I think that's why I run Android, but not necessarily why I'm concerned about security of Apple products.
Maybe I'm pushing the envelope a little bit too far, but definitely on the condescending side, I do feel like there's some condescending kind of attitude.
We know what Apple has, that we know what's best for you, but that's not always a bad thing either, because I do think that users of technology sometimes just need to be told, this is what's best for you. You know what? You're going to have an iPod, you're going to have an iPhone, and you're going to have an iPad. And if they had asked people, they'd be like, no, I don't need any of that crap. And Apple's like, no, you do, like, trust us. And, like, turns out they were right. I mean, those are 3 of the most prolific technology advancements, you know, in this entire ecosystem that we talk about. So there are places where, Joff, to your point, where that kind of arrogance helps them. But when it comes to security, it really hurts them because we like transparency, right? Like we don't want to be told.
That's just it. Like if you had somebody come out from any company, I don't care who they are, and say, hey guys, hey security researchers, I know you're really cool hacker people and you love taking stuff apart, but trust us, our stuff's perfect.
Yeah.
Like every one of us to our core fiber is going to say bullshit. Right? We're all going to go, no, let me look under the hood. Seriously, let me pop that thing and like dig around. And
but that's where I like Microsoft, because even if you look at Microsoft 20 plus years ago, they've got a track record of doing that. They're like, hey, security researchers, come to Redmond, show us, like, work with us. And they've done that. They created Blue Hat. They embrace researchers, I think, more so than Apple does, in a huge way.
I think it's an evolution, though, because we do see a lot of software vendors go through this evolution. Where, like, you know, we've created this perfect entity, and we suddenly realize that it's not so perfect, and our first reaction is defensive, and like get the bank of lawyers and whatever. But hopefully, the vendor evolves to the point where, hey, maybe we need to embrace these people because they kind of acting part of our QA team, and you know they're giving us free labor here, right? But that evolution has got to transpire, and I think in Microsoft's case, they almost didn't have a choice. They had you know such a large market share and such a huge exposure that it was evolve or die in their case.
Yeah.
Right.
No, it's true.
But I think I know we want to move on, but I think part of what's going on here is so frequently I try to think about this stuff from the company's point of view. You know, it's partially sort of my where I sit as a startup guy. I think both of like how my consumers take a thing as well as what I'm trying to put out there, and you know the craziness behind my scenes.
You don't have to justify having empathy. I appreciate that. I do. I really do. No, what you're talking about is empathy. No, totally agree.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but think about this empathy-wise for Apple for a second, and I know I'm not going to get too much of this here, but the idea is if you think about a lot of companies, we're either an engineering-driven company or marketing-driven or sales-driven, right? It's usually one of those 3 is what's driving the product. I think Apple is really extreme on the marketing side. And I think the result of that is they're controlling that message so much, not to us. They don't care about us, right? We're a speck. But they're controlling that message out to the general public when they're selling, 250 million iPhones in a year, that we're not getting attacked that much. We've done a great job with the security. Everything's pretty cool. Your credit card goes right here. Take the next device. So I think that's more what's going on. It's not so much. There is a little bit of like saying, okay, you in particular, I'm going to give you a test device so you can hack on it. So that bugs me. But I think what their goal and how we're interpreting it is probably a little bit different.
No, if anything in Apple's roots is they're a marketing-driven company. Yeah. They are credited with the best television commercial in all of television commercial history. The 1986, hammer coming through the screen is the best television commercial in all of history. And I think that really is what established that point in history, established them, John, to your point, as a marketing-driven company. And that's been driving their success, right, to all of their products that they introduce into the market.
I think that point really does answer the question, right? We're a spec, we're a minority. We might have some importance in a small part of the company somewhere, but it is not even significant in the overall forward progress here that's going on. I think that's a very, very salient point.
But I also think on a positive note too, I don't think Apple's going backwards in working with the security community. I do believe they are pushing forward to work with security researchers in a more positive way. It's just much slower than we would like to see.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And slower in comparison to their competitors.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not showing in the numbers though.
Well,
That's the problem.
Market share is, I don't know.
Shows,
we can talk about phones. I'm excited about the Pixel 6. I know, but again, I'm in the minority because most people are on, the iPhone platform. So,
I don't know, man. So I'm still hanging with my OnePlus here. So
I bet with this listener base, it's probably over 50% not iPhone.
Yeah. No, agreed. Yeah, to Josh's point, we're excited about the OnePlus. We're excited about the Pixel 6. I'm going to go right to Pixel 6. I mean, that's where I'm going.
Yeah. Good. What's next, Paul?
Yeah, I did want to talk about IBM servers. Where was that story? I just saw it, and then I lost it. Yeah, the X-Class servers, which are IBM's kind of like Blade kind of servers. It's funny, I actually was talking with John Lucades from Eclipsium all about firmware security. And maybe what you didn't hear in the ESW interview is we were kind of talking about behind the scenes, what are your competition? Like, what other companies are creating security solutions so that enterprises can fix their firmware, and I use that in a generic sense, right? But validate their firmware. Is it the latest version? What kind of firmware you have on your system? Is the firmware you're running not match what the manufacturer provides? Like all of those things. I think Eclipsium's in a category by themselves in that, which I applaud greatly. Being very much a firmware kind of nerd, and where this ties into the IBM X-Class story is, it seems like their management interface, like on Dell, we used to call it DRAC. HP, It was something different. IBM, something different. Like there's essentially a computer inside the computer that allows you to manage that server, right? The operating system can be non-existent, but I can still get into it. I can power off the server, power on the server, and do certain management activities. But
super handy.
It is super handy. And I've used it in the past, certainly. But in IBM's case, their firmware and the details are very, very light. Like I actually try to do some research on this, and every time I would kind of pivot and go off and do research, all roads led back to the one threat post article that is right now the definitive source on this, that basically said a specially crafted series of packets, air quotes, specially crafted, specially crafted to SSH or the telnet services that are running on these. I don't know what IBM calls their I do. It's called IMM. I forget what that stands for. Integrated Management Module. Thank you, threat post. And in the IMM, it's vulnerable. I don't know how. Like I was kind of trying to figure out, like, is it a remote code execution? Is it authentication bypass? Like, is it a misconfiguration? I couldn't figure out how they managed to really essentially screw up an SSH or telnet service, which was kind of astonishing to me. Like, even in embedded architecture, like, really? Like, you screwed up SSH? Like, it led to remote code execution, or at least unauthentic. I shouldn't say remote code execution. Execution of operating system commands over an authenticated SSH or telnet session. So I don't know if it's unauthenticated or authentic. Like, the details are so light on here that I couldn't quite figure out what was going on. It's got a CVE assigned, and hopefully we learn more. They do link to the bug hunter, Denver Abre, and really the only thing on Denver's Twitter feed is like, hey, cool, I got a CVE, but like no details. So I'm assuming Denver has done the responsible disclosure and can't really say much else about it. I would usually 16 years of covering these stories, most often I would find that the company and or person that found the vulnerability has like a write-up. So you read the popular press, and then the write-up is like, oh, here's how it's exploited. I didn't find that for this one. But
so, I just got to make one comment on this, Paul, but these kinds of stories always trigger me, and I'll tell you why. I have been doing this stuff for a long time. And
You know what that makes you, Joff?
Old.
Yes.
It's
Yes,
pretty simple. But I have insisted in past lives that any quote unquote management or firmware driven management port on switches, routers, whatever, will always live in a segmented network and will not be routed to anywhere, and you can only get to them if you have a physical device on that network.
Right.
Yeah,
But Joff, when I'm at home and the data center's miles, any number of miles away,
I know what you're going to say.
how do I get to it, Joff? Somewhere that network has some level of, some method of access, right?
I know what you're going to say. And I got shot down every time because people, invariably, the question that would come to me from systems administration folks was, can we bridge that network into the production network because I need to get to this thing, right?
But it's even like when I worked for the university, I didn't want to have to walk down 4 flights of stairs to go to the data center. I wanted to do it from my workstation, right?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
My workstation's on the 4th floor. The server room's in the basement. Like that's a long walk. Or it's an elevator ride, then I got to badge in, then I got to go find a terminal somewhere. It's a pain in the butt. So we would use, Ethernet to serial. Like we had this on our Solaris systems, right? That didn't at that time really have these management facilities. So what we did was we bought these devices, and these devices would plug into the serial ports. And you'd get a terminal, right? You get a terminal TTY over to the serial port, but on the other side there was an Ethernet interface. I connect to that embedded. It was essentially an embedded system, and I would SSH to that embedded system, and from there I could gain physical terminal access to all of my servers. Right? This is very similar, if not the same thing.
Well, here's the problem, and we all know what this is in the security community, and that is, when those devices are deployed, they have a fixed lifespan, and the lifespan's normally anywhere from 2 to 5 years, somewhere like that. And that's probably being generous now. But the issue is when a vulnerability is discovered, those out-of-band management interfaces are never, in my past experience, able to be updated easily. Right?
No, it's not easy. If you can update them, it's not easy. Agree.
Yeah, and so if they're connected to a production network, it immediately becomes a very serious vulnerability because then you've got an out-of-band interface that has an authentication bypass or a buffer overflow or whatever, but it immediately gives you complete physical access like you're in front of the server to shut it down, do whatever you need to do. That's bad, right?
And IBM's advice on this one is to disable SSH and Telnet on all of your out-of-band management embedded systems, essentially.
Which means you might as well just unplug them, right?
Well, so it leaves you with the web interface, but like, as we know, if you're managing these systems, you want the ability to SSH, hopefully not Telnet. Like, I'd disable Telnet, right? I'd leave SSH enabled, right? But like, still, I'd still want access to the command line on all of these systems. I don't know. It's not... It's like, we have a vulnerability, so therefore just disable those services and just use the web interface. Like, that's not
right. And this comes home to roost multiple times. I have been on several pen tests where that is a finding, where I have actually gained access to one of these out-of-band management interfaces and have a screenshot in there that says, "Hey, watch me reboot your server. Here's the button."
It gets even better than that, Joff. Like just searching for the web management interface. And then I use the default password to log in the web management interface, which has the like web to like actual console of the running operating system. A previous administrator had logged in the web interface, used the web interface to create a console, became root, and then just closed the browser. And so when I connect with the default credentials, I go, give me a system console, and I'm staring at a root prompt. And I'm like, I don't need any other hacking skills other than like Google to like figure that out to be root on your server. I'm like, we need to fix this. Yeah.
That's embarrassing, right? I mean, just
what's fun to think about these is, how did we get to this place, right? So some engineer, probably back when it was still IBM, said, hey, we need out-of-band. Our competitors at Dell have had this thing going for a few years. We need to have a way of doing this too, because, the dude doesn't want to walk down 4 rows. Well, let's put put Linux on there. Let's grab a copy of, something that's for a firmware and put that out and put it on. And that'll work because we use it on some other system. We've been using Linux at IBM, and we know it really well, right? So we're going to put it on this X series board. We're going to turn on SSH, probably open SSH, telnet D, and I don't know, web. Let's go really cringy and say like PHP with Apache. And that's good. We're good. We can get this shipped and move on about our business. And now that dude's gone. They no longer want to actually go and patch this version of OpenSSH, which is on there. And that's probably how we ended up with this problem. So if you want to find the bug, Paul, probably just go back through the OpenSSH forums over the last year, and you'll probably see what's going on. Yeah.
No, you're right, John. I don't believe there is no patch for this yet either. Because that dude left, to your point. That person. I don't assume John, but
excuse me, yes.
Yeah. That person left, right? I mean, like that was a team that did that and then was reshuffled. Like, oh, we did that before we bought Red Hat, but now we bought Red Hat and we had people that knew Linux. And guess what? They're going to be working on the Red Hat side of things, and that left a whole gap. I'm just obviously speculating, but like that's what happened in IBM. They bought Red Hat, right? So hopefully they get the talent from Red Hat and bring some of those folks back in to work on this issue. But like, who knows how they're prioritizing that, and who knows how their customers are demanding that. Like, this is an issue that demands prioritization, in my opinion.
For heaven's sake, can they just build a way to patch the out of band kernel from the actual operating system? I mean,
but that in itself is a vulnerability as well. That two-way communication between operating system and firmware is in itself a vulnerability. It's a convenience. It's also like a good thing because you can update it, but also an update process that you can take advantage of.
Yeah, but if you sit down several of us together, we could work out a way to do this. I swear to God, we could. Yeah. Right?
And there is. I mean, there's great standards with UFI, but still people don't patch it. I do want to talk about HTTP request smuggling. I want to ask a question. Like, what's the relationship between HTTP request smuggling and server-side request forgery? I mean, do they go hand in hand? And sometimes they're not the same thing. Like, one is the vulnerabilities that can exploit each other. Like, there's an interesting relationship between the two. Like, you don't want a server-side request forgery with HTTP request smuggling. I feel like the smuggling is the conduit to that vulnerability. And HAProxy had the HTTP request smuggling, which I think is more of like, I've put some controls around, what can go through my proxy, except I can bypass that if there's a smuggling vulnerability. John smiling. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I was looking at a comment on Discord. This would be a really great interview question, right? So let's see if I can go past the interview. With the server side, I believe you're requiring the server to actually do manipulation and rewrite part of that before it sends a request on its way. Versus with what we have here, it's just
passing it.
This is coming down to the ability to have multiple requests within a single connection.
The request is in the body.
Yeah. Well, basically, you say the content length is what their buffer overflowing. Well, their integer overflowing the content length, which will reset it, and they'll go, oh, there's another request, and then it goes to handle that. Probably with some of the.
It's a tunneled HTTP.
Yeah, you're right, Joff. That's a great way to describe it. Yeah. And this was an HAProxy, which is pretty popular.
Actually, it's kind of analogous to double VLAN tagging, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
For sure.
It's a similar thing, right? You unwrap the outer layer of the onion, and the inner layer is some other HTTP request, which gets legitimately processed.
Yep, and you can almost even look at SSRF as being, in a way, similar to SQL injection, where you have a server in between that is making the requests for you. So you, as the client, you hit one server and you ask that server to make requests on another.
It's like rather than going back to the client, it's going back to the server.
Yep.
Yeah. It's weird that those kind of lines between these web application vulnerabilities, right?
Right.
the lines are very, very blurry. Yeah.
But again, it comes back to that same type of thing as we added functionality to try and make, because the reason we wanted to have multiple requests within a single connection, right, is we're trying to minimize that overhead of teardown and setup of your TCP stack or your TCP connection. So, hey, we'll just have multiple things in there, and now you've got another way to possibly go whoops.
So make sure you look at HAProxy. If you're, it's interesting. You may be running it and not really know it. I feel like you buy like a load balancer from XYZ company, and that's what's under the hood. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
That's scary.
Yep.
Well, that's true of so many things.
Like Ghostscript, for example, my story number 18, a proof of concept was released for Ghostscript. I did some digging into this one. They released some proof of concept code. This was actually from a security conference that happened in Russia. Is what I gathered from it, like someone whose name is Emil Lerner demonstrated an unpatched vulnerability for Ghostscript at the Zero Nights X conference in St. Petersburg, Russia last month, which is interesting how we're just reading about this now. He demonstrated using image magic. Essentially, it deals with using the image magic or Ghostscript, library that gets called in like multiple things inside of Linux when you want to render PDFs and or images. He used this as an example on how he hacked Airbnb and Dropbox, right? Because it translates into the server side as well, which I have another story I want to pivot, kind of off of that. But there is a proof of concept for it as well, which is kind of these Linux vulnerabilities that are in these. Is Image Magic a library or kind of like a service that you call? It's kind of interesting to blur the lines between those, right? It's more of a library, I think, but yeah. I think there is a patch for this one.
So, there's kind of multiple layers to this, right?
Yeah.
Server-side request vulnerability itself is kind of interesting and growing with the increasing prevalence of very heavy client-side frameworks. There's a lot of people that are pushing that client-side rendering work over to the server, and so some server-side exploit attack surface in general is opening up, right? This is leading to some very interesting results, and this is I think an example of one of those where you have a server-side request vulnerability where the server is able to do all sorts of things based on the fact that there is a vulnerability in the back-end image magic stuff that's being run, right? And you look at that image magic code. I mean, I don't know, Paul, how many years have we been using that stuff? And
the research, and so Emil has a slide on that. If you dig into the article, I think I put some links in there. He has a slide that kind of chronicles the image magic vulnerabilities. It's pretty.
It's a long list.
What was also interesting is they said when he attacked Dropbox, it led to a remote code execution, but was limited to a non-privileged user. And then the article says limiting its potency. I feel like that's not really. I mean, there's so many privilege escalation routes, especially when you take into account that could be running as a container. I mean, John could probably talk for another 17 hours about that, right? But then he says the researchers escalated the scope of their vulnerability by causing Python to import their script when triggering an exception. I don't quite know how to unpack. There's lots of ways you could unpack that. I'm not sure if the presentation's in English or Russian or whatnot, but I think it deserves a little more.
I need more. Is what when I hear that, I need more. And I mean, it is. If you've got an unrestricted Python environment that's able to run in the background, there's a heck of a lot you can do with that, right?
I don't even really need to be root at that point to really do some damage, right? If I can execute Python in the context of the even running non-privileged user. Oh God.
Well, it's also there's all the little sort of edge cases, right? I mean, Image Magic, they're like, oh, it's a Swiss Army knife. It's going to do all these wonderful things for us. The only wonderful thing it's done is given us wonderful bugs in all these different areas.
Yeah.
I know that's not true, but the one that got me on this is that less, our standard command for those of us who don't use more, if you want to
Less
page
is
a
more?
file on a Unix system, it has a bunch of magic built into it to try and figure out what type of format it is and then do colorization and stuff like that. And in some systems that uses Ghostscript. So,
Well, John, you bring up a great point because Google was commissioned. So the way I understood this is like the Biden administration met with a lot of large tech companies. One of the topics was cybersecurity. Google pledged like billions of dollars to help the cybersecurity problem. By the way, I think this is all really positive, in great strides. So Google is backing the security reviews of key open source projects. You've seen a lot of companies do this, Qualys being one, and several others. I think this is great work. And they have created this OSTIF. They've mapped 25 projects that they're looking at. They're looking at tools developers use, Drupal, Joomla. They identified Git as, think about Git and how many people and organizations use it and how critical that is. They actually called Git like the second most important open source project to secure. Git is the second most critical application in C and the 10th most critical application across all platforms. I'm assuming the number one is the Linux. Is it the Linux kernel? They don't say what the number one is. I would assume the kernel.
Or iOS.
That's not Linux.
Open source.
Well, that's not open source.
Open source.
It's not Linux either. Not that it has to be Linux, so we're talking open source, but
yeah. I don't disagree with that statement on Git. I think that, Git, especially now, think about...
Could Git be... I'm sorry, John. Could Git be number one? If you're developing the kernel, you're probably using Git, right? You're using Git to commit your kernel update. So does that mean... Why isn't Git number one, I guess is my point.
Look, I spent my whole day programming in Golang. And what does Golang use under the hood to get package dependencies?
It's Git.
Yeah.
Git.
What are you using to commit to your repo? It's probably Git, right?
But the other side of that is a little worse. The go get is obviously important. I spend my day that way too. It's a wonderful way to spend your day.
It absolutely is.
We talk about doing, having our chain of trust in supply chain security and signing all our commits. If the thing that's signing my commits, either GPG or Git, that's got a little bit of a someone's been playing hanky-panky in there. From the get-go, I've got no trust in what I'm doing, so I can see it being fairly important.
Yeah, I would. I love one.
Hey, did you say playing hanky-panky?
I think I did, yes.
Oh yeah,
that could be the title for this episode: playing hanky-panky,
playing
in security. Oh boy. But I do commend Google. It does. So the end of the article. So they said after a meeting between U.S. President Joe Biden and top U.S. tech companies last month, Google announced a $10 billion commitment to improving, expanding zero trust programs, helping secure software supply chains, and enhancing open source security. And this is one of their efforts to support that. And I think it's sorely needed, right? We've spent a lot of time with Wheel and the researchers at Qualys that are looking at open source vulnerabilities, and we're like, holy crap! The attack surface there, the pseudo vulnerability was a shining example. Here you have, I forget the person's name that's been maintaining pseudo. He is an extremely talented developer. And they found vulnerabilities in that they could chain together in code that has existed for like 20 years. And that's just one example, right, in open source software where we could have some vulnerabilities. And I think you need those billions of dollars, large companies kind of backing this type of research that is going out and finding, in funding rather, these initiatives to make open source software more secure. Because we all rely on it, right?
It's not cheap. I mean, it's super expensive. I mean, think about any of us for a day, right? So I talk about too much on ASW, but I've gotten fairly active with CNCF, mostly tag security, but also some of the Kubernetes security stuff. And so I'm part of a team there that's helping us public that we're actually farming out for the next round of a code audit of Kubernetes. I've seen the bills for that. And thank you to Google and all these other companies that do donate to the Linux Foundation. Then it comes down to CNCF. This stuff isn't cheap. I mean, it's
but how many lines of code you're talking about in Kubernetes? And what level of talent do you need to people who can read? I just want to throw this out there. People who can read and understand the code that goes behind Kubernetes. Add on top of that, folks that can derive security vulnerabilities from that code. It's a much smaller set of people. That's a skill, and it takes time. Even people with the skills takes time.
Yeah, when you're cutting corners, right? Because all of us who've done this professionally, we know how to you got your grep sets, or you're using how you focus it down on key areas.
Yeah.
The scope section alone for Kubernetes, I think it's 10 different utilities or something, or programs and daemons, and it's. So I was just looking at OSTIF on their website. They've got a list of the packages.
I'm sorry, that's Open Source Technology Improvement Fund.
Yes, .org. They've got a list of the packages. So OpenSSL, please Jesus fix that.
Oh my God.
Or just go to Libre. OpenVPN, that was interesting.
Yep.
Veracrypt, Unbound wouldn't have been on my radar, but okay. Monero, so they're thinking about that. Quantum resistant ledger. So it's an interesting bunch of stuff. Then there's a bunch of smaller things, like you said, GPG, TunnelBlick, Signal. Is that open source? I guess it's partially. NoScript. So yeah. They've got some interesting stuff queued up. That should be interesting to see how it turns out.
I got to tell you, you piqued my attention, John. I mean, once you get beyond Git, OpenSSL would be a very high second.
Yeah, and we've seen that obviously in the past, but.
Yeah,
that always amazes me too. When I read the book Crypto by Steve Levy, and kind of understand how far back the Diffie-Hellman algorithm dates, and how far back the RSA algorithm dates, it spawned this newfound appreciation for all of the flaws and things that people have found in these various protocols and implementations. Wow, this stuff has been around for a long time. And even after it was around for all that time, we still found flaws in it, and still do to this day. It's just amazing. Yeah. It's amazing. And I was explaining to my family and my kids that sometimes I force them to listen to the audiobooks in the car. And I'm like, sometimes I pause it.
I think they love you for that, John.
Yeah, it's a love-hate kind of thing. But sometimes I pause it and I'm like, do you know what's going on in the book? And they're like, I'm kind of lost, Dad. I'm kind of lost. I'm like, look, the reason that you can go to a website like Amazon and order securely the thing that you want to order is because these really smart people created these protocols that allow us to have these secure communications. This is a really significant part of technology history, in today's world. So I kind of put it in perspective for them. This is really significant, and the fact that we still find vulnerabilities in this stuff is it's astonishing to me. And largely because the complexity is one thing, right? I don't know what contributes to. Is it there's more people looking for it? Is it? It's a really tough problem to kind of wrap your brain around.
It's more under the microscope today than it ever has been, and that's healthy, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, because blockchain, I think, in cryptocurrencies put a different kind of realm and element to it all as well, that we're not just relying on it to make a transaction, but it's also your transaction plus the storage of your currency and your money as well, which ups the stakes even more, right? Because blockchain uses that Diffie-Hellman algorithm that was developed in, was it the 70s?
Well, I think it's important
70s,
for us,
right? It was 70s. You can date it back to. Yeah.
I do think it's important for us to separate the theoretical mathematics from the actual implementation.
Yeah. No, it's true.
If you look at Diffie-Hellman and what they did, the theoretical mathematics is as solid as can be. If you look at the, AES and Rhine-Jail, I don't know how to say it. I never know how to say it. But that algorithm is really, really solid. The approach is fantastic. The implementation is where it goes wrong so many times, and it needs to be tuned and tweaked and so on. OpenSSL is a fabulous, fabulous project, but with that much microscope on it, I guess, for lack of a better word, there's going to be problems somewhere. Right? There's a lot of different ciphers implemented in there. There's a lot of different PKI implemented in there in terms of public key cryptography.
Something about prime numbers.
Yeah. There's some prime number choices that seemed like a good idea at the time.
At some point, we're going to do some. We've talked about this. At some point, we're going to do some segments that try and help break some of this stuff down, because there's so much to unpack, so much to understand, and I think so many of us in the community have different pockets of knowledge and levels of understanding, right? That I think having some segments that kind of unpack some of that stuff is really good.
I am so focused lately on writing more security fundamentals classes, and cryptography is one of those that I would like to tackle.
Yeah. And you know what's funny, Jeff, about that is that Dimitri, one of our listeners, brought up a great point. He said, a lot of the stuff, like when you guys talk about SSL and us in general as a community talk about SSL, a lot of it's like the stuff that you read and study. You may take a test, or you may just read and study it as it's part of like, just general curiosity. And then you kind of forget about it, right? Like, time goes on and you don't use that level of detail down to a certain level in your everyday kind of jobs, right? And you kind of forget about it. And I don't think we should forget about it, right? I think it's interesting enough and significant enough that we need to continue to highlight it.
I kind of look at it as analogous to, any grand endeavor. If you think about how much engineering and how many components it takes to, fly SpaceX Dragon, right? This is how we need to think about OpenSSL or the TLS standard. There are thousands and thousands of components that go into this. There's theoretical mathematics. There's implementations of multiple ciphers. There's public-private key cryptography. There's, it's an engineering monolith.
Well, there's the practice and the theory, right? And a few weeks ago, I ran into this thing where I had to match a certificate signing request with a private key, and then I had to use the modulus function in OpenSSL to go, like that certificate signing request matches this key and not the other key kind of thing. And I'm like, in practice, I get it. In theory, I'm really fucking confused. Like, I'm really, really confused, but I'm really curious, and I really want someone to explain this to me and like how all that works, right? So practice and theory, I think, are also two kind of different things, schools of thought.
Yeah, for sure.
So here, let me throw something out, sort of see how the crowd reacts. We've got Google offering up, let's call it $1 billion, but some large amount of money to secure open source projects. On ASW, we've been going sort of gaga over Rust for the last few months, and we've seen what Microsoft is using it to rewrite some of their sensitive device drivers. I think Linus is now saying it'll be okay in the Linux kernel. So how about we take OpenSSL and what was the other one in there, Git, and let's just pay some really top-end coders to rewrite those two bad boys in Rust.
Rewriting is dangerous, though. My gut reaction to that is rewriting is dangerous. Because you've got to start not just from the beginning with architecture, design, and implementation, but testing.
Same arc, right? So it should be the same arc. We should be able to know, right? It's like we've been using both those things now for many years. We know specifically what they should be doing. we know what they're no longer needing to be done, so we should be able to cut out some of the noise. Come on, this is a tell. Once I say should be, we're already off to a bad start.
Yeah.
But
why Rust? Out of curiosity.
So the thing about Rust is the problem we see with most of the security topics we've been talking about today come down to C, right? And it come down to buffer as well as integer overflows.
Memory management, essentially memory management.
Yeah. So really, and also parsing. So if you look at how Rust has been done, it's sort of similar to Go, wherein that a lot of that memory management is handled for you automatically. So you're not having to worry about pointer arithmetic or checking for a null value on a string or all these type of things. So that's why, it's probably the same with Amazon. They've cornered the market on Rust coders now, is my understanding. But it's people are starting to look at it for that particular use case.
So the biggest advance, is what you're saying, and I agree with this, in modern programming languages is a few things, but fundamentally they come down to solid memory management and garbage collection and bounds checking, right, and type safety, right? These are the big things, and the thing we're suffering from in the historical archive of dynamic libraries that were authored in C is those weaknesses, bounds checking, type safety, those kinds of things. But it's not a lightweight thing to say, why don't we rewrite those? Because we are talking about foundational libraries of thousands, perhaps millions of lines of code. And so do people really want to expend the dollars to actually do that? Is it worth the effort to do that rather than actually patch the source code vulnerability as discovered that's at line 50 to 100 in several million lines? But
it's a really prolific point, John, that you make in that can you wipe out some of those fundamental things that have been defined in various works and we know about in the language itself, like null pointer dereference, right? Some of the really esoteric things, can we make those like mistakes you just can't make in a language?
Well, I mean, they are wiped out. I mean, John's right. They are wiped out in a lot of languages unless you take off the safeties, right? I literally was programming in Go today, and everything I was doing, because that's what I do, was taking off the safeties.
Yeah.
But for the most run-of-the-mill stuff that you're going to program at an application layer, you're probably not going to take off those safeties. You're not going to...
For a library, too, can you get away with writing a library without taking off the safeties?
That's going to be
the key. That was a Dan Kaminsky thing, and I miss Dan greatly. And one of the most... he had so many prolific things, right, that he instilled upon us as humans. And one of the things was, like, if we can give programmers a framework where they can code securely, that's how we win in security, right? And he had some initiatives on that. And I that was really, all my years of doing the show, really, one of the concepts. I was like, yeah, you're really on to something there.
No, he's right. He was absolutely correct in that. I mean, there's no doubt about it, right? But the thing that we cannot discount is that legacy of engineering that built us up to a certain point. You don't want to cut out the base of the pyramid because it's almost like you have to start again. And who's going to want to do that? We're talking about thousands of millions of hours of work.
Yeah.
That's the issue, right? It's not. We recognize that it's not.
The issue in the elephant in the room is that programmers are lazy, and that's why we import libraries and reuse code.
We all recognize that the foundation of the pyramid has problems.
We'd rather use something that's kind of crappy or most of the way there than try and re-engineer it ourselves. I think in fear that we could create something maybe more crappy, right? That's really wow.
But
John,
that's what
John, you take my brain to some really interesting places. All of you, all three of you have done that tonight.
That's what's sort of going on here, though, right? The government has now recognized that we have these fundamental problems that we've got here, however we have, right? There's the K&R book is all sorts of great things, and it's a very fundamental, clean little description of a very beautiful, elegant language. But unfortunately, you have to really be on top of your game to be keep track of everything in there. But now that we've got a government and corporations willing to spend on it in the U.S., that's, you spend money because people aren't taking care of things themselves. So now's a chance of how do you do it right.
So
that's true.
John's giving us the message that's optimistic, that government and corporations are willing to spend the money now in this period of time, is what I think I'm hearing. I'm still a bit of a cynic on that. I don't think they understand how much it's going to take.
Yeah, it's really, because I think that many of us, right, are like, well, government's evil, I don't trust the government, but I'm more looking towards the larger corporations that I don't trust, that are producing some of this vulnerable software. I don't trust them. I trust the government more than I trust them, right? And I think that if the government can fund those resources to allow us to be in a better place, that we overlook times they've done that in the past, right? Like the reason that we have the infrastructure we have today with the internet and telecommunications is because the government subsidized a lot of that build out and a lot of that research. That's why we have the internet today. That's why we have all the telecommunications infrastructure we have today. And it was Corey, someone help me. Corey
Doctorow
that pointed that out several years ago on an interview as well. Because I was like, dude, regulation's bad. Like, tell me how regulation is good. He's like, well, the government underwrote and through regulation, like, helped us build this communications infrastructure that we have today.
Yeah, I was going to say the government can create entire sectors of the economy.
Yeah,
where you need to trust government direction is if they get it right, they can create enormous opportunity and an entire new scope of direction and growth. It's when they get too far in the weeds is when you shouldn't trust them,
right?
In my opinion, right?
Which they largely haven't on the internet. I talked about the book Katie Hafner, Where Wizards Stay Up Late. Great read, by the way. Great read of how the internet was created. We'll give you kind of the interesting perspective of how it was a government project, right?
I'm putting it on my reading list right now.
No, it's a great one. It's a great one. I want to switch to a lighter topic. Awesome conversation. But I want to talk, drone security is certainly something we've talked about here on the show. Talked about a lot about hacking drones. Kevin Finisterre has given some great talks. One at Security Weekly, Security Unlocked last year, about the telemetry and privacy issues with running drones from Chinese company DJI and some of the things that happen there. In this case, and we've covered stories like this before, and I mean, this is how contraband, I think what a lot of people may not realize outside of technology, like this is how contraband ends up in our prison system today, is someone basically, like, it's not as high tech as you think. They fly a drone into the prison and they drop off contraband. And in this case, it was drugs and cell phones, which I think that combination, if you're in law enforcement, you were like, oh, that was destined for a prison, because the combination of drugs, I believe this was marijuana, tobacco, and 3 cell phones, like that was likely destined for a prison.
Sounds like a party.
Right? Like, it sounds like a party. Someone dropped this off, but something happened to the drone where this package, I don't know if the package was dropped or the drone crashed in a high school. Woo! And but now what's interesting was, if you read the article, they didn't just go scoop it up and take it away, which is kind of interesting. If it was dropped in a high school, I don't know if it was over a weekend or whatever, but they waited till someone went and picked it up. And then they brought that person in for, they had some serious questions for the person that was collecting the marijuana, the cell phones, and the tobacco from a drone in a high school. They're like, excuse me, we'd like to bring you in for some questioning and question that person. And I don't know what happened after that. It was kind of light on all of the details, and I don't know if the drone ran out of did it run out of battery? Was it like a GPS miscalculation? What happened? But then you start thinking about, and this actually kind of intersects with a hacker from history. Max Butler, aka Max Vision, was actually in trouble in the correctional institution because of the drones and cell phones and things like that. Like, there was a whole story on that thing, which I think he got out of prison. Someone told me I think he might be he might be out at this point. Which that was another great book, Joff. If you're keeping tabs at home, I don't remember the name of the book, but someone wrote a book about the whole story of Max Butler, aka Max Vision, which was largely credit card fraud. Got in trouble with the law multiple times, and the last time was the one that sent him to prison for a long time. But yeah, kind of. I was kind of interested in like what caused the failure. What are the detection mechanisms? What technology is gonna kind of proliferate that, like, our prisons now going to all have this like drone technology to prevent this contraband from being dropped in them? Because this is not the first story that I've seen or heard about where drones are being used for this purpose. Yeah,
so it makes you wonder whether prisons are going to end up having RF disruption technology because just to cause drones to crash or veer away, whatever. Because that's it's obviously a real issue.
Right.
I believe that is a market vertical is selling cell phone jamming tools for prisons, but one of the problems with them that the FCC complains about is if they're not tuned right, it starts interfering with what's the phrase? The public outside of the prison.
Yeah, because not all prisons, like in Colorado, prisons are in the middle of nowhere, and some of the highest security prisons exist in Colorado, and they are literally like in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing around them. But you move into more populated areas like the Northeast, Patrick, as you may know, like our max security prison is in Cranston, Rhode Island, like one of the most populated cities in Rhode Island. Like, it is not in the middle of nowhere by any stretch.
Nope.
It is in, like, there's a cigar lounge down the street, a couple of really nice restaurants. Like, the news broadcast station is like literally right across the street from the prison. That kind of thing. So, John, to your point,
I don't know how Paul knows this, but I do know this. When he goes in there, he wonders why his wireless is not working.
I know it because, like, just traveling in Rhode Island, you're like, oh, yeah, there's the prison. Like, because you can't not drive by it because it's, like, right in the middle of a metropolitan city. Yeah.
Yeah. Crazy stuff.
It is.
Yeah, and this prison, where it seems as though the goal is right in the middle of what seems like the regular town. There's another school right next to it, the high school where it was found. Just looking at Google Maps, looks like it was about 2,000 feet away. So
yeah,
I don't know if it's possible that they just dropped from super high up and maybe wind blew it that far.
Sure. Yeah, it doesn't say whether the drone crashed or whether it was just a package that was found or whatever. Yeah,
it would be great to know who found it and narked on it.
But it's interesting. Like, you got to imagine that the U.S. military has anti-drone technology, whether that's detection, whether that's active prevention. I'm sure they're not really like forthcoming with the technology that they have. It's kind of funny. Several years ago, we did an interview on ESW with a company called RF Spotter that could spot via RF, right, like radar, but RF frequencies could spot people that were violating vehicles, whatever the threat was, that was violating a perimeter. And I believe at that time he also had drone detection technology. Now, because I asked him the question, I'm like, so similar to our poop in the Roomba story, like in RF, how do you know whether it's a drone or whether it's a bird, right? And if you train an ML algorithm, a drone behaves very differently from a bird, and so you can detect those differences. And obviously he was selling, I would imagine, selling to military installations. At what point did this become more ubiquitous technology that is available to prisons or even just private people who want security or that kind of detection technology?
And while, of course, you can change the software, but these drones also come with software that have no-fly zones, and they don't fly in certain areas. And I would assume that a prison is probably a
probably not. Though the stories I've read, Patrick, that is not a rule that's enforced. Like, the primary way because I tell you, I've covered stories like this on the show. I've read stories like people use drones to drop contraband in prisons. Like, that's a thing.
But that makes me think they overrode the software.
Could be.
I mean, if you build your own drone, though, right?
Sure.
I mean,
if you hack the software, hack the firmware, right?
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely.
But so my DJI, I actually live in line with a runway with Renton. So for me to fly, take off my Mavic outside, I have to go and get clearance. It's it's just pointy clicky, but still. But if you build your own drone with any of the open source stuff, or even just buy like a controller module, I doubt that has that software on there.
That's right.
Or if it does, you could choose to include it or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So here's on our fun deep thoughts for tonight. How many years until we see warring gangs that are actually trying to hack each other's drones so that they get the drugs to the other person's place, or they're able to take them and steal them?
I mean, we've seen Amazon try and use that for package delivery.
Yeah.
I bet it's already happening. We just don't know about it.
Yeah.
Could be. That could be a whole segment, how criminals are using technology like that, right?
Don't have to hack it. Just shoot it down and let it drop whatever it's got.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I always laughed about that. When Amazon was thinking about it, I was like, oh my God, there's gonna be a whole new sport, especially here in the South. It's gonna be like it's gonna be like drone hunting.
I think Amazon abandoned that package delivery via drone service.
No, I think they're still doing it.
Are they really?
Yeah. I don't know where, but I mean, it can't do it in like a city, right? But
yeah, who knows?
On a closing note, make sure we're going to post the live stream of Doug and I building the computer. But what I didn't realize, when all the parts were delivered, when the case was delivered, it was actually not delivered directly here to the studio. It was delivered to the cigar lounge next door. So like we have a sign that like, hey, if you're delivering a package to us, like we have a good relationship with our neighbors. If we're not here or you can't find someone, you can deliver it next door. Totally cool. And we were all here when my PC case was delivered, but they delivered it to the cigar lounge next door. And I didn't inspect the package enough. And when we were about 5 minutes from going live, I looked at the case and it had been damaged, like really bad. Like there was a huge dent in the case. And I'm like,
oh no.
I'm like, Doug, we got to roll with it. Like we have to fix this. Like you and I have to basically hack a solution right now. And we told the production team, we're like, go get all the hammers and pry bars we have in the studio right now and put them on the table. And we spent the first 5 or 10 minutes of the live stream actually hammering the case and bending it back into shape so we could do the build.
I can't wait to see this.
And so I can just see this drone delivery thing, like, packages being damaged. And we talked about it afterwards. I'm like, I bet the reason why the poor Amazon delivery person delivered it to the cigar lounge was they didn't want us to refuse delivery. Because I got to expect that if an Amazon delivery person delivers a damaged package and I refuse it, like that person could probably be fired. And I'm like, so you know what? I'd rather have that person keep their job for like $120 case. Like have that person keep their job. Like I'll hammer it back out with a hammer and it works. It boots up. Everything installed fine. I'm
it's
like,
whatever.
Case. Like whatever. I want some poor person to lose their job over that. And I guarantee you, because Amazon is not a nice place to work from what I've read in that respect. So yeah, it probably wasn't that person's fault. Person probably was like, it's on my truck and it's damaged, and if I don't deliver this, I'm gonna get fired. So
happened in the sorting facility.
Yep. So whatever. Awesome. Well, everyone, thank you very much for helping us out with the show. Patrick, John, thank you very much. Everyone, thank you. Everyone else for listening and watching the show this evening. We'll see you next time. Over and out.